A young white girl was left hanging with a sign, Indian Land, until a lonely Comanche cut her down and changed everything. Outskirts of Rosewood Settlement, Northern Plains, late summer 1873. The wind carried the scent of scorched timber and blood. Smoke still curled in thin ribbons from the remains of cabins, drifting through the broken fence lines and into the blackened cornfields. Birds did not sing. Even the sky, heavy with ash, looked away. At the center of the ruined settlement stood a timber gate, what was once the proud entrance to a new frontier village. Now it held something else. Clara May, 19, hung limp from the crossbeam, her arms bound high above her head with rough-cut rope. Blood stained her temple, trailing down to her collarbone, dried and cracking. Her boots had been taken. Her dress, once sky blue, was torn at the hem and streaked with soot. Her chin sagged against her chest, but the slow rise and fall of it gave her away. She was still breathing. Beside her, nailed to the wood in dripping red paint, was a crude sign, Indian Land. A small group of warriors lingered in the square, their horses chewing at sparse tufts of grass. One of them, broad-shouldered with war paint still streaking his cheeks, turned to the figure standing near the gate. "Beaver, let them all see what happens when they steal our land." Another, younger, shifted uncomfortably. "She's just a girl. She wore the dress of settlers. She pays the price." A third man, who had not spoken yet, stepped forward. He was lean, wrapped in soft buckskin, his long dark hair tied with a strip of faded red cloth. His name was Tyann, and though his blood was Comanche, his eyes bore none of the fire the others carried. He looked up at the girl. She was barely conscious. Her lip was split. Flies hovered near her wounds. And yet she clung to life. "Then I'll pay mine too," he said. The others turned. "What are you doing, Comanche?" "She's still breathing," Tyann said simply. "She's settler blood. She's still human." Without waiting for approval, Tyann stepped forward. He pulled a knife from his belt, clean, well kept, and began to climb the support beam of the gate. The wood creaked beneath him, ash dusting from the surface. "Touch that rope and you sever your place in the circle," one warned. Tyann said nothing. He reached the crossbeam. The sun hit her face. One eye fluttered open, then closed. The knife sliced through the rope with one quick pull. Clara dropped forward into his arms, limp and feather light. He climbed down slowly, carrying her like a wounded fawn. The wind lifted her hair. The painted sign above them flapped once, then stilled. The other warriors turned away, muttering. One spat into the dirt, but none stopped him. Tyann walked through the village's remains, stepping over charred beams and broken glass, until the last of the ruined cabins was behind him. He found his horse tethered near a well and lowered Clara gently into the bedroll slung across the saddle. As he mounted and turned the animal eastward, Clara stirred. She moaned, tried to sit up, failed. Her voice cracked like dry bark. "Let me go!" Tyann said nothing. She opened her eyes, barely, and saw his face, saw the leather, the feathers, the dark skin. Her body jolted in panic. She twisted, fell from the horse, and hit the ground hard. She tried to crawl, dragging her bruised limbs toward the woods. Tyann dismounted and stepped toward her. "No," she rasped, backing away. "Don't." She reached for a stone, swung it weakly, missed. Then she looked straight at him, and for the first time her voice rose. Raw, breaking. "Just kill me. You savages already took everything." Her hands shook, her shoulders heaved. And then she collapsed. The stone rolled from her palm, her head slumped to the earth. Tyann knelt beside her, brushing dirt from her cheek. He looked at her not as an enemy, not even as a victim, but as something too human to leave hanging. He lifted her again, arms secure, voice quiet. "You are not dead yet," he whispered, and he carried her into the trees. The stream whispered softly as it curled through the pines, its surface catching what little light filtered down from the gray sky. Beyond it, nestled beneath a ridge and half swallowed by brush, stood a forgotten shelter. Timbers sun-bleached, roof patched with bark and mud, the kind of place no one claimed anymore. That was where Tyann brought her. Clara did not stir much on the ride. Her head lolled against the saddle blanket, her lips cracked from sun and thirst. Tyann said nothing the entire journey. He lifted her carefully, carried her inside, and laid her on the small bed of woven grass. Dust rose. The place smelled of damp wood and moss. He started a fire, poured water from his canteen, and soaked cloth to press against her brow. When she woke, it was evening. She screamed, "Get away from me!" Her voice was hoarse, but sharp enough to cut. She scrambled toward the corner, wincing, dragging her legs as pain flared in her ribs. Tyann backed up without a word, setting the wet cloth beside her. He left the hut, sat near the fire outside, and let her breathe. That night she didn't sleep. Neither did he. By morning, Clara had tried to leave. She stumbled down the hill, made it to the trees, but her ankle gave out and she fell hard. When she came to, her face was pressed into pine needles and her dress was caught on a thorn bush. Her arms refused to lift. Tyann appeared silently, crouched beside her. "Don't touch me," she rasped. He did not. He simply waited. When she could no longer breathe from pain, she turned her face away. He lifted her again, slow and steady, and carried her back to the shelter. He did not speak, did not scold. The second time she tried to escape, it was at dusk. She crawled toward the creek and fainted at the edge. He found her slumped in the mud. The third time, she did not try. But when she opened her eyes and found herself once again wrapped in a blanket, her anger boiled over. She shoved the blanket off. "Why don't you kill me like the others?" Tyann sat across from her, legs crossed, hands open on his knees. "I didn't burn your home," he said quietly, "but I saw who did." She stared, breathing hard. "My people," he continued, "Comanche, Kiowa, Cheyenne, they did this. I won't lie." Her lip trembled. "If they took a home from you," he said, "then I'll give one back." She flinched, as if unsure whether it was kindness or another form of control. He rose slowly and left. Later, the smell of smoke drifted in, not fire, but broth. He returned holding a clay bowl, steam rising from the rim. She was sitting up now, her back stiff against the wall. Her wrist was swollen, fingers stiff. She looked at him warily. He knelt beside her and offered the bowl. She didn't take it. Her hand would not close. He noticed. Without a word, Tyann dipped the spoon, blew gently, and raised it to her lips. He hesitated, then opened her mouth slightly. The first spoonful went down rough, the second smoother. She coughed once, then kept going. She watched his face as he fed her. For the first time, not as something foreign, not a threat, not a monster. There was no heat in his eyes, no judgment, only something still, something solid. "What's your name?" she asked quietly between sips. "Tyann." She nodded, once. Her fingers curled slightly around the blanket. Outside, the wind rustled the pines. Inside, for the first time in days, Clara May closed her eyes, not from pain, but from warmth pooling in her chest. Not safety, but the shape of it. The days passed slowly in the shade of the ridge, marked not by clocks or calendars, but by the rising and setting of light through the broken seams in the shelter walls. Clara's body healed in fragments, bruises fading to yellow, cuts sealing into thin pink lines. But her trust came slower, if at all. She still startled at the sound of cracking wood. She still flinched when Tyann moved too quickly, but she no longer tried to run. She watched him instead. He was quiet, so quiet that sometimes she forgot he was there. He walked barefoot inside the lodge, never slammed a door, never raised his voice. When he did speak, it was brief, single words in English, carefully chosen. "Eat," he'd say in the mornings, placing warm bread on a cloth near the fire. Water when he'd return from the stream with a cool bucket, his shoulders damp with sweat. And then one afternoon, when she froze at the sound of distant thunder, curling into herself like a leaf, he knelt beside her and placed a hand on the ground. "Safe," he said, not war. She looked at him, not entirely believing, but some part of her, some deep, tired part, wanted to. Tyon did not push. He did not hover. Each morning, he would rise before her and leave something by the door, sometimes a strip of dried meat, other times a handful of wild berries, or a piece of warm cornbread wrapped in cloth. She never saw him place them, but they were always there, like offerings, like small, quiet truths. He slept by the hearth, she slept by the wall. The distance between them was not forced, but chosen. One morning, as mist clung to the trees and the air tasted faintly of ash, Clara stepped outside and saw him sitting on a flat stone, hunched over a piece of wood no larger than a loaf of bread. His knife moved carefully, not slicing, but shaping. She watched in silence, arms folded against the cold. Later that afternoon, when he went to gather water, she approached the stone and saw the carving left behind. It was a bird, or nearly one, its wings half spread, its head raised. The detail was rough, but alive, as if it were halfway between being born and taking flight. She ran her fingers gently over the wings, then pressed her thumb to the unfinished edge. That evening, when he returned and found her near the fire with the wooden bird in her lap, she did not hide it. She looked up at him and said softly, "If you carve me wings, I'll try to fly." He didn't reply, but something in his eyes shifted. The next day, she helped gather firewood. It was awkward at first. Her ankle still throbbed and her arms were weak, but she carried a small bundle back to the lodge and set it by the wall without falling. He watched, but didn't comment. That night, she stirred the stew while he chopped roots. The moment was quiet, unremarkable, until she accidentally spilled salt into the pot and muttered a curse under her breath. Tyon glanced up from his chopping, raised one brow, and said dryly, "Bad magic?" Clara blinked, then laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in weeks. A short, startled sound, but it was real. Tehan tilted his head slightly, lips twitching at the corners. Not quite a smile, but close. They ate together in the warmth of the firelight, shoulder to shoulder but not touching, steam curling up from bowls that smelled of wild onion and bone. They did not speak much, but something passed between them, something that did not need words. When she burned her tongue, he handed her a cool cup of water with a soft, amused grunt. When he forgot to stir the pot and it stuck to the bottom, she muttered, "Tastes like revenge," and he chuckled, the sound low and unused. Later, as they cleaned the bowls, she asked him, "Why do you stay here, alone?" Cannon paused. "Too many graves," he said, then added, "Not mine." She nodded. It was enough. That night, as she lay on her bed of woven reeds and fur, she stared at the carved bird on the shelf across the room. Its wings were still incomplete, but something about it made her chest ache, not with grief, but with possibility. She did not love him, not yet, and he did not ask her to. But for the first time since her world had burned, she felt less like a ghost and more like a girl again, one sitting beside a fire, sharing stew with a stranger who no longer felt like one. And in the silence between them, a small fire sparked. Not loud, not wild, but warm enough to stay. The cold came early that week, sweeping down from the hills like a warning. The fire inside the shelter crackled low, wrapped in the scent of pine resin and slow-cooked broth. Outside, the trees bent slightly in the wind, their branches brushing the sky like bony fingers, searching for something lost. Clara sat near the hearth, her knees drawn up beneath the hide blanket Tayan had patched the day before. Her fingers toyed with the edge of the fabric, not from cold, but from the quiet between them. Tyon was beside her, carving again, his blade whispering against wood. The bird had new feathers now, lines more certain, wings more open. Clara watched it take shape for a long while before her voice, quiet and cracked, finally broke the silence. "They killed my parents," she said, eyes still on the fire. "Not like, in battle, just came into the house. Shot my father through the back while he stood at the stove. My mother screamed. They dragged her outside and slit her throat. Tyan did not move. Clara's voice wavered but didn't stop. My sister tried to run. She was 14. They caught her, took her. I still don't know if she's alive. The fire popped sharply. Still, Tyan remained silent, respectful in his stillness. I hid in the root cellar, she continued, her hands now pressed together in her lap. I watched from a crack in the floorboards as they burned the Thompsons alive in their cabin across the way. I could see them through the window, Mr. Thompson shielding his baby with his coat. Didn't matter. They all burned. She looked over, her eyes dry but glowing with something deeper than tears. They painted the doors with blood. I can't forget the smell. Tyan slowly set his carving aside. His voice came low, like earth shifting beneath snow. I wasn't there, he said, but my people were. Clara said nothing, but her body stiffened. I was taken by the Comanche when I was 5, he said after a moment. My real parents. I don't remember. Just fire. Screaming. Then nothing. A woman in the tribe raised me. She had no sons, so I became hers. He leaned back, eyes tracing the lines in the roof above them. But I was never truly one of them. Too light-skinned, hair not dark enough, eyes like a coyote, they said. I learned to fight, to hunt, to ride. But I never belonged. Clara tilted her head. Why did they keep you? Tyan gave a hollow smile. Because I survived. That made me useful. She nodded slowly, then asked, And why did you help me? The question lingered in the air between them. Tyan's gaze found hers, not evasive, not distant, but piercing in its honesty. Because if someone had helped me, he said softly, maybe I wouldn't be so good at being alone. The words landed between them like a quiet offering, not meant to convince, not meant to win. Just true. Clara looked down at her hands, fingers still wrapped around the hide blanket. Her chest ached, not with anger, not with fear, but with the sharp, unfamiliar weight of recognition. They had not lived the same lives. They did not come from the same blood, but pain had drawn the same lines through both their hearts. She stood and walked to a small pile of supplies Tyan had gathered over the past weeks. Scraps of leather, sinew, broken buttons, folded cloth. She knelt, chose a square of soft hide, and sat by the fire. Tyan watched without speaking as she threaded a needle with slow, deliberate care. Her fingers still trembled slightly from her healing wrist, but she worked anyway, stitching small, uneven lines until the cloth began to take shape. It was a handkerchief, rough at the edges, but steady. When she finished stitching the border, she looked up at him. I never sewed anything before, she said. My mother did, but I was always too clumsy. He gave the smallest of shrugs. Looks whole to me. She smiled, small and real. Then, without explanation, she took the needle again and stitched one last word into the corner, in blocky, uneven letters. Tyan. She held it out to him. He didn't take it at first, just looked at it, as if unsure whether to be honored or ashamed. It's not much, Clara said, but it's the first thing I made that wasn't for survival. He reached forward and accepted the cloth, folding it carefully, gently, as though it were breakable. Then, for the first time since the night he cut her down, he said her name. Clara. She met his eyes. Not as a Comanche, not as a girl lost in war, but as two people who had been scarred by the same fire, just from different sides of the flame. The morning was still, the kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. Fog draped the trees outside their shelter, muffling birdsong and breeze. Tyan had gone early to check snares by the ravine, while Clara ground acorns by the fire, humming an old hymn with no words. It felt, briefly, like the war was far away. Then came the hoofbeats. Soft at first, just murmurs in the ground, but Tyan felt them before she did. He stopped, turned toward the east, muscles tense. Clara stepped out, basket in hand, and saw him staring into the fog. What is it? She asked. He didn't reply. Then figures emerged, bare-chested, painted, armed. Comanche warriors, his people. More followed. 6 in all, bone necklaces, leather fringe, paint like blood across their cheeks. The leader stepped forward, eyes locked on Tyan. "You are not forgotten," he said in Comanche, "nor forgiven." Tyan stood firm. "I left war behind." "You brought it with you," the man snapped, glancing at Clara. "You hide what we marked. She was left to burn. You sheltered her." "She was not fire," Tyan answered. "She was ash." Another warrior stepped closer, angrier. "She is the stain that says we didn't finish. The others will forget. The line must hold." Tyan moved in front of Clara. "You will not touch her." The men didn't wait. One grabbed Tyan's shoulder. He shoved it off, and the fight exploded. They hit him hard, fists, elbows, a spear butt to the ribs. Clara screamed as he fell, blood across his cheek, but even on his knees, he kept himself between her and them. "She is mine to protect," he roared. "She is not yours to finish." But he was alone. They dragged him back toward the trees, his heels tearing tracks in the dirt. Even then he shouted, "Clara, run!" She did. Not blindly. She ran to the ravine, to the cave behind mossy rocks. Crawled inside, pressed against stone, hands over her mouth to silence her sobs. Outside, shouts faded, hooves moved off. Silence fell. She waited, minutes, maybe longer, until her knees ached from crouching and her heart from fear. Then she crept back to the clearing. "Tyan," she called softly. She found him slumped by the fire pit, blood dried at his temple. His chest rose, but barely. She dropped beside him, shaking, brushing hair from his face. His eyelids fluttered. "You stayed," he whispered. Then he went still. The next days blurred, fear, sweat, and desperate work. His fever climbed. He muttered in broken words, called her name. Names she didn't know. She tried everything, cool cloths, bark tea, crushed herbs, but nothing worked. On the 5th morning, exhausted and hollow, she packed the leather satchel, tied a knife to her waist, and left. She pushed through thorns, dug moss at stream edges, scraped willow bark with bleeding hands. A snake hissed once near her feet. She didn't scream. She didn't stop. By the time she returned, night had fallen. Tyan hadn't moved. She boiled what she found, fed him spoonfuls, wiped his brow, and sang softly. "Stay with me," she whispered, holding his hand. "Please, stay." At dawn, his fever broke. He opened his eyes, tired, red, but clear. "You came back," he rasped. "I never left," she said, the tears falling now. And when he closed his eyes again, it was not from pain. It was peace. Tyan woke to the smell of smoke, not the kind that meant danger, but the soft, herbal kind that clung to healing leaves. The fire crackled gently in the stone pit, casting orange light across the shelter's wooden walls. His body ached in dull waves, and his head throbbed with each breath, but the fever was gone. The fire was real. He was still alive. Clara sat beside the hearth, her knees drawn to her chest, a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her hair was a tangled mess, her face pale and smudged with dirt, but her eyes stayed open, watching the flames, refusing to sleep. Her chin dipped, once, twice, as she fought off exhaustion. She did not notice he was awake until he shifted slightly. Her head jerked up, startled. Their eyes met. He said nothing. His lips were too dry, his throat too raw. But in his gaze there was a question, a quiet wonder. She leaned forward, poured water from a tin cup, and brought it to his mouth. He drank slowly, grimacing at the bitter aftertaste of herbs. When he finished, she set the cup down and reached for a damp cloth, dabbing gently at the sweat still clinging to his brow. "You stayed?" he rasped, his voice barely more than breath. Clara didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just nodded. He closed his eyes, let the warmth of the fire press against his skin. Let the sound of her breathing anchor him. "I thought," he began, but she cut him off softly. "I know." She shifted closer, her voice hoarse but certain. "You kept calling my name," she said, "even when you could barely breathe." Tyann opened his eyes again. The firelight made her face seem older, more worn. There were lines near her mouth that had not been there weeks ago. But there was no fear in her now, no flinching, no need to run. "I could hear it," she added, almost to herself. "Even when I hid, even when I was too afraid to move." Tyann did not ask her why she returned. He did not have to. In the days that followed, he healed slowly. His strength crept back, one muscle at a time. Clara brought him broth, changed his bandages, helped him sit upright when the pain in his ribs flared. She never mentioned leaving. Not once. Every morning, as dawn crept over the treetops and lit the clearing in gold, Clara would wake to find something placed just outside the door. The first day it was a single feather, long and silver gray, tucked inside a strip of leather. The second, a small clay pot with a young sprout already breaking soil, its roots wrapped in moss. The third, a carved stone with two birds etched into its face, one with wings open, the other perched beside it. And then one morning she found the finished carving. The wooden bird, now complete. Wings fully spread, chest lifted, eyes wide. It sat on a flat stone, waiting in the first rays of light. She held it in her hands, running her fingers over the grooves he had carved, feeling each stroke as if it carried his heartbeat. When she brought it inside, Tyann was awake, sitting upright with a blanket over his shoulders. Their eyes met again, and this time there was no question left between them. She placed the bird gently on the shelf above the hearth. Then she sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, her silence saying all that needed to be said. She had not stayed out of pity. She had not returned for debt or obligation. This was not rescue, not repayment. This was choice. Two people once broken, now choosing the same place to begin again. The house they built was not grand. It did not have glass windows or painted shutters or floors that did not creak. But it stood firm on the ridge above the stream, made of thick-cut logs and packed earth, its roof layered with bark and hide to keep the rain out. The old lean-to was gone now, taken apart beam by beam, reborn into something stronger. Every board they placed was touched by both of them, every stone in the hearth laid by hand, side by side. Clara dug the new root cellar herself, her hands blistered but proud. Tyann carved the doorframe, inscribing small patterns along the edge, not tribal, not symbolic, just something uniquely theirs. When they were done, and the house was ready to hold more than silence and survival, Clara took a scrap of pine, sanded it smooth, and with the tip of her smallest blade, carved slow, careful letters into its face. Home of Clara and Tyann, where no one was left hanging. She nailed it above the door herself. It was late summer when they found the child. They had gone deeper into the woods in search of honeycomb and had followed the sound of crying instead. Beneath a fallen wagon, half covered in leaves, lay a boy no older than 5, his clothes tattered, a welt on his temple, his eyes so wide they looked older than he was. He did not speak for 3 days. They brought him home, fed him warm broth, let him sleep by the fire. Tyann gave him space. Clara gave him names for things: fire, blanket, safe. On the 4th morning, he reached for her hand and whispered, "Ina." Clara froze, eyes stinging. It was Comanche. Water. Later that week, as Tyann knelt to help him fix a broken toy wheel, the boy mumbled, "Pana." Tyann paused, then smiled. Water. They never asked where he came from, never pressed him for what he had seen. It was enough that he stayed, that he laughed eventually, that he learned the alphabet as Clara drew it with charcoal on smoothed bark, that he sat between them at meals and sometimes, in his sleep, called out names they did not know. They planted corn that year, rose crooked and stubborn, built a chicken pen, sang songs without words. On warm nights they sat outside beneath the stars, the boy nestled between them, pointing at constellations as Tyann gave them names only his people knew. In time, travelers passed through, Traders, wanderers, those without maps. Some stayed for a night. Some left behind seeds, advice, or news from far-off towns. All were fed. All were safe. The house on the ridge became more than shelter. It became a place where no one was hunted, no one was abandoned, no one was judged by skin, blood, or the weight of their name. And every morning, when the sun crept over the trees, that small wooden sign above the door caught the light like a blessing. Home of Clara and Tyen, where no one was left hanging. The years passed like water, slow, steady, carving soft valleys into the lines of their faces and silver into their hair. The house on the ridge remained, though time weathered its roof and the garden grew wild with more mint than corn. Birds nested in the eaves, smoke rose from the chimney every morning, and the sign above the door, though faded, never cracked. Home of Clara and Tyen, where no one was left hanging. One autumn, long after the child they raised had become a man with children of his own, a group of government men arrived on horseback. Their boots were polished, their coats buttoned to the neck, and their words clipped, like they had been practiced in train cars and courtrooms. They brought maps and promises, unrolled plans for a rail line that would run right through the ridge. "This land would serve the country," said the eldest one, tapping the paper with a gloved finger. "We can offer fair payment, Mrs. May. Mr. Tyen. Progress is coming either way." Clara stood at the doorway, her hands dusted with flour, the scent of rising bread drifting from inside. Her back was straight, her eyes sharp though softened with age. She didn't answer at first, just turned slightly, gesturing toward the house behind her. "That roof was stitched together after a war," she said calmly. "Those walls were built with hands that used to bleed." The men glanced at one another. "This was built not on land," she continued, "but on grief and grace. We won't sell that." Tyen emerged beside her, silent as ever, his shoulders broad despite the stoop of age. He looked at the men, then past them, at the trees, the garden, the path their grandson had carved with his feet running to the stream. Then he looked at Clara. And he nodded. The men did not stay long. A week later, they hammered a new sign at the gate, just beyond the path where wildflowers grew stubborn between stones. Carved into the wood were the words, "Not Indian land, not white land, just loved land." And below it, in Clara's careful hand, "We already found what we were looking for." Over the years, the house became more than home. It became a refuge. Wanderers came, lost men, runaways, girls who could not go back to where they came from, a boy with a burn across his cheek, a woman who had buried too many children. Each one brought nothing but their brokenness, and each one was fed, given a bed, taught to stitch, to fish, to find north by the stars. Some stayed, some healed and left, but all remembered the firelight, and the quiet couple who never asked who they were before they arrived. Clara still kept herbs drying near the hearth. Tyen still carved birds in the evenings, though his hands had begun to shake. Their adopted son came often, bringing children who called them Ina and Pana. On warm days they sat beneath the old oak and told stories, some true, some softened with time. And every night, when the house was quiet, Clara would lay beside Tyen, their backs curved to fit the shape of the years between them. She'd rest her hand on his shoulder, her fingers brushing the ridge of old scars, and whisper, "You gave me back more than a home. You gave me a life." Tyen would murmur something low in reply, usually not words, just a sound that meant yes, that meant I know, that meant thank you. They never left that ridge. And long after they were gone, the house still stood. Visitors would find the path. They would see the sign. Not Indian land, not white land, just loved land. And some would cry, because in a world full of borders and blood, someone had chosen instead to build a home out of mercy, out of memory, out of love. If this story touched something quiet and aching in you, if you felt the weight of Clara's courage, the depth of Tyen's silence, and the sacred beauty of a home built not by blood, but by choice, then you've just taken a ride through the kind of love we live for here at Wild West Love Stories. Out here, in the dust and distance of old America, we tell tales that are more than romance. We tell stories of redemption, of loyalty in lawless places, of hands held after heartbreak. Stories where love does not ask for permission, it just stays. If you believe that even the most broken places can grow something whole again, if you believe in love that defies borders, history, and hate, then don't just watch. Ride with us. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories like this video, and share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Because in the Wild West, love isn't always easy, but it's always worth it.